How we doing, everyone? We good? Everyone can hear me? Nice. Happy Monday. So basically, myself and Rob from Twitter UK, and ultimately we just really wanted to come in here and just talk to you guys. I guess community is a big thing for you, which works incredibly well for Twitter. It is the ultimate community-led social media platform. So yeah, we're just going to kind of give you a top-line overview of what community means, especially for the gaming community on Twitter. I work in the partnership teams here at Twitter. So essentially what that means is I help our partners, i.e. publishers, brands, developers, influencers, really help them partner with Twitter in ways that can help them commercially, in ways that can help them organically, any issues they might have. So that's primarily what the partnership team at Twitter does.
Cool, so I'm Rob. I work in the market research department of Twitter UK, and I manage all the market research for gaming, tech, and telco across the board. So I do all sorts, deep dive into audiences. 2 of the research projects I've been working on, we'll show you today. We really wanted to just come here and get you guys to learn 3 distinct things. So the first one is I'm going to take you through a research project we did in 2017, looking at specifically how information flows on Twitter. Hopefully for your communities, you want to get out their best practice in terms of communicating with those users, specifically on Twitter. And we're going to go through some best practice and some stages that we've identified within that hopefully give you guys some good learnings to take away and to use. The second part is we've done a second research study segmenting specific audiences on Twitter, and we're going to take you through some of the content that best aligns with their use cases for Twitter, why they're using Twitter, and specifically for casual, hardcore, and mid-core games audiences. And then lastly, Reese is going to take you through some examples of how to connect with what's happening. Next slide. So kind of rolling that back a little bit. Obviously, the way in which we consume information in the 21st century differs massively to how we'd done so maybe even 10 years ago. And that's due in part to the growth of people like Twitter, but also Reddit, Instagram. These platforms find themselves at the heart of the discovery process, and you'll go to these platforms to find out new information about what's happening in the world. So Twitter itself, we see as being what's happening in any day and age, and what's happening could be different to different people. So for what's happening for me, I like going to the gym and I like getting the latest and greatest in information about running. So I follow a lot of other runners on Twitter itself. So I go and use the platform specifically to find out news and information on that subject area. But for you guys, obviously within the gaming industry, you do the same. You curate your timeline in order to follow the best and greatest people to follow for new information about gaming specifically. And I actually, I don't think the sound will work for this one, but one of the things that just a tidbit of something that's very Twittery from the BlizzCon and the birth of the "Do you guys have phones" meme is something that I picked out as something that I consumed on Twitter, and something that's very Twittery in terms of its nature. Next slide. Oh yeah, okay. Nice. Oh, I'm the whole thing. How many of you have actually seen this before? Yeah, it's one of the one of the most cringe-worthy moments that a developer's ever had on stage. But it's not something that I go and watch all the time. But for this, I think it's good to get in there. As a Diablo player as well, I was upset in the nature of this discussion. No, I know. How did they get it so wrong?
Do you guys not have phones? Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
Yeah, a bit out of touch with that. But again, an example of something that I saw on Twitter first and something of very Twitter in nature. So to understand how information flows on Twitter, we broke our research project into 3 distinct areas, all taken from different methodologies. So the first one, we've got our own user community called Twitter Insiders, which is made up of about 5,000 users, which we did a bunch of qual and quant on a range of different subjects. And we spoke to them about how their consumption of news has changed over time, and how that differs to a couple of years ago even. Secondly, we worked with a market research agency called IPG Media Brands Marketing Sciences, and we worked with them on social fingerprinting. So social fingerprinting was a network analysis on a number of different stories in 2017 to understand the clusters of conversation that they grew in, and the way in which stories naturally grow on the platform. And then lastly, we utilised our own internal big data analytics to study a number of stories, again in 2017, to understand the volume and velocity of conversation as and when a new piece of information actually arrives on the platform and how it spreads. Cool. So what did that look like? So we took 38 stories. It was a range of stories. So branded stories, stories from the gaming industry as well, new launches of new products. As an example, we looked at one of the Apple iPhone launches, a number of other goings-on in popular culture. We analysed in our analytics over 1 million different data points, and we actually talked to over 1,000 users over a 3-month period to understand how that consumption of information had changed. So in terms of what we actually found, so there's kind of 2 distinct learnings. So the first is we found that there's a natural 48-hour window of interest for any one single piece of information as and when it comes onto the platform. And we know this because 87% of the stories that we studied actually peaked in conversation within that first 48-hour period. And about, on average, 85% of the total conversation within that story had happened within that 48 period as well. And we kind of put that down to a number of things. The amount of information that people are consuming now, it's at all-time high, and so people have less time to consume and less time to concentrate on one thing. And so interest fades very quickly once you release a piece of information on Twitter. So actually taking that, within that 48-hour period, we've been able to understand the structure and the stages in which the stories go through. So much like electricity, we've got 4 key stages of a story within its first 48-hour period. So the first being Spark. So Spark is the first iteration of a piece of information on the platform. So as an example, if I was to put out a tweet about something that I'd seen on the street, that would be a Spark. It would usually lack a lot of context or detail to it, but just the initial single tweet that went out there. The second is your conductors. So conductors is where either a large networked account or a verified account, an account with a large audience, take that single piece of information, kind of add a bit of context and weight to it, and then send it out to their followers. Surge is where you see the majority of the conversation happening, is where the majority of average everyday Twitter users kind of become involved in the story itself. They add their opinion or debate the subject of the piece of information. And then Flow, finally. Not all stories reach Flow. Flow is taking the context of this new piece of information. The story kind of carries on into lots of other conversations that are separate and distinct. So we use an example here to illustrate that a little bit more. So to stay true to the research, we used one of the examples of the stories that we had actually studied and broken down like this. So this was a big piece of news from 2017. It was the announcement of the British and Irish Lions touring squad. So for those of you that aren't rugby fans, obviously a big occasion on the rugby calendar, happens every 4 years. A group of rugby players get selected from across the UK and Ireland to go touring in the Southern Hemisphere. It's very competitive test games and something that's enamoured by rugby fans all over. So as you can see here, the initial spark of that single piece of information was the official count from the British and Irish Lions that announced the different players that had been selected. It didn't add too much context or weight to it. Your conductors here, so conductors in this sense could be BBC Sport or TalkSport in the sense that they're covering that piece of news. They usually add a little bit more context to that single piece of information and spread it to their large networks. But for here, obviously the example being Scotland Rugby, who had 2 players selected from the national team to go on tour, and congratulating them. Then Surge. So this is where you see often a lot of debate and opinion based from our everyday users. This example being Kevin, who's an angry Irish fan, not understanding the non-selection of Irish over Welsh. So Flow, the next section, taking that context and knowing the squad, that piece of information is released to the masses. Now the conversation flows into a new conversation altogether, looking at the squad and who from the squad should be selected for the first game, and talking about the upcoming games themselves. So now we know what that looks like. We've got a little animation here of how that looks. So starting with the Lions official, you can see that it separates into the different nodes of conversation and clusters, kind of grouping around the different largely followed accounts there, like BBC Sport and TalkSport. But that's what the story looks like in terms of the conversation itself, clustering. So now we know the shape, that 40-hour period of a conversation dipping and falling. And we also know the different stages that they fall in. We've got some examples of gaming stories over the last few months that kind of exemplify that. So obviously this is a big piece of news and information from the gaming industry in the release of the PlayStation Classic. If you go to the next slide. And you can see that we can plot that along those same key stages within the first 48-hour period. So the first being Spark, This is where the initial tweet went out from PlayStation itself. The second, a conductor being IGN, who actually produced their own video in conjunction with the announcement, spread it to their large network. And then the third is where your everyday user, obviously reminiscing about how special the PlayStation 1 was and their choice of the games that should be selected and preloaded on the PlayStation Classic. So my second example here is obviously the announcement of Red Dead, and we've taken as an example the release of the third trailer. So the third trailer actually had the most in terms of conversation on our platform and spiked the most interest. So that spark on May the 2nd of that release of the third trailer goes on to the conductors being around verified accounts, reacting to it with their own funny content. And then this goes on to surge of the people that were anticipating the release of it and looking forward to the game itself. Cool. So now we know that first 48-hour periods, there's this natural window of interest, and you can separate that into the 4 key stages that we've identified. What makes it very hard for you guys with your communities is, once you release that piece of information, how do you keep people's interests past that 40-hour period and maintain that top-of-mind awareness to keep them lead into the communities and the games that you guys are developing? So what we've done here is actually we've done a second research project looking specifically at the gaming audiences on Twitter and understanding the content that aligns with them best. We wanted to keep the audiences quite top-line, so we didn't want to go too specialist. But one piece of continuity between all of them in terms of the content is that they use Twitter to see what's happening within the gaming industry and to stay informed. We've looked here at casual gamers, mid-core gamers and hardcore gamers, obviously separating it by the amount of playing time that they're utilising and then also the intensity of the games they're playing. And we work with our Twitter insiders again to segment our audience like this and to understand their consumption behaviours and how they differ to each other. So what I've done here is I've just taken out the most over-indexed activities and behaviours of those audiences, what they're most likely to consume on Twitter specifically, and what they're most likely to use Twitter for. And you'll see this across casual, mid-core, and hardcore. So in terms of our casual audience, more often than not, actually they don't self-reflect as being gamers themselves. When we've asked them, do you consider yourself a gamer? The majority of them said no. But that still means that they use Twitter to stay loosely informed about what's happening in the gaming world. And they also, because they're not specialists in what they do, they also use Twitter, a more general platform, to understand what features and what tips and tricks they can use from their own network to get their upper hand on the games that they play. So your mid-core audience, usually with the ones that we analysed that use Twitter, have a heavier rotation of games, usually playing multiple games per week. And so actually you find that Twitter plays a role as being an important platform for purchase consideration. So they're looking specifically on Twitter for opinions and reviews of new games from the people that they trust and the networks that they follow. And they also use Twitter to consume new game trailers, and they use it as a discovery for new games that they play. So lastly, for hardcore audiences, they want to discover the real nuance to the games that they play. So whether that's following accounts in terms of getting exclusives or getting the upper hand on the friends that they play the games with, or they use Twitter to actually find out the impact of updates and patches and whether that would add or benefit them in a competitive way. So that's generally a good top line of those distinct behaviours between those audiences and why they're over-indexing to understand them. So a quick summary of the 2 research projects, the 2 key learnings to take from the research projects that we've done are obviously to keep in mind that there is always a 48-hour natural window of engagement and interest of any one piece of information that you have on the platform. But above and beyond that, you need to be able to, obviously aligning the different content that you produce with the audiences you're trying to approach to keep that top-of-mind awareness. So Reese is going to take you through exactly how it's possible to connect with what's happening on Twitter.
A key theme that we've kind of brought up at numerous points throughout the presentation is the ability of Twitter to connect with what's happening. And over the last 2 years, one of these key kind of like movements for us in this particular area was the investment into premium video. So ultimately, when we look at connecting with what's happening, we're going to just look at how premium video has played a key role in that. And I guess that's something that you guys will be seeing yourselves across not only Twitter, but across a bunch of other social platforms, and also the work that you guys will be doing with the likes of John T and influencers like that. So ultimately connecting with what's happening is being driven by the access to premium content. For us, that really started off when we were looking at how Twitter plays its role in offline experiences. So when you're looking at kind of like esports events, gaming festivals, gaming events, full stop, we see that fans are turning to Twitter to have these conversations around these events. So whether you're there in the audience or whether you're at the festival taking part in one of these games, the conversation that you're having may be offline, but ultimately you're going to go offline to really broaden that conversation out and really talk to your Twitter gaming community. And there are just a few stats around that as well. So looking at the uplifting gaming conversations around events like E3, around events like kind of like celebrity-driven Fortnite events and things like that. So ultimately, these experiences are driving conversation on the Twitter platform. For us, that actually meant how can we bring these premium content moments directly to audiences? For us, that meant bringing those offline conversations to Twitter. So bringing these premium moments directly to our audiences by hosting these events on our platform. So for us, that meant going to these festivals and bringing live experiences directly to us. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to skip through that video very quickly. For us, what those content moments we really meant and really broken down into is just looking at what people are interested in and what our gaming community is interested in. So whether that be esports, whether that be bringing live esports events to the platform, whether that be bringing important editorial moments to the platform, are also big brand moments from the likes of publishers and developers directly to our Twitter gaming communities. For us, this meant investing in being able to host these big events. So working with the likes of FIFA to host the eFIFA World Cup that took place earlier this year. It was broadcasted on Sky Sports, but at the same time, it was also broadcasted live on the Twitter platform. So again, whilst these moments are happening and people can actually consume that content, whether it's from an offline experience, the conversations are taking place on our platform. Again, with the likes of Face It Major London that took place earlier this year, broadcasted live on Sky Sports and on Twitter. The same goes for big gaming festivals. So E3 was a big moment for us. We got to take those big moments where there were big launches and big products to really bring them directly to our communities through that live premium content that we're doing on Twitter at the moment. What does that mean for you guys and how you can really take advantage of that? Well, Twitter's in a unique position because it's really that epicenter of mainstream culture and gaming culture. So the fact that we can bring those two communities together in a very unique perspective enables you guys to really take advantage of the Twitter platform. A great illustration of that is what you've seen with the kind of the launch of Fortnite and how that went from the Twitter conversation in yellow really kind of like illustrates where that went from being a gaming conversation to when there's moments like Joe Jonas jumping on the platform and playing. Whilst that moment happened on Twitch, that conversation really took place on Twitter. And that goes even further when the likes of big cultural mainstream players like likes of Drake really come into it. And again, those moments might happen on other platforms, but the conversations are taking place on Twitter. And that just goes into overdrive when things like the World Cup happen. And again, these big cultural moments, whilst they might take place on TV, the conversations around it happen on Twitter, and it really brings those two cultures together. I'll really just summarize here. Gaming communities use Twitter to connect with what's happening. And because of where Twitter is in that epicenter of mainstream culture and gaming culture, it's a fantastic way to connect those two universes. And the use of premium content is a fantastic way to do that. Finally, just to kind of, I guess, summarize what amazing research showed, and I guess what we've seen with Twitter is that there's great ways to support your communities through our platform, whether that's through regular news updates and staying informed and helping them stay informed about what's happening, whether that be through premium branded content, so continuously posting kind of premium content from your own perspectives, and also supporting premium content, so whether that be through sponsorships of live events or big moments from gaming festivals. Again, the more you can help your communities connect with what's happening, the better you place your being to be what's happening yourselves. I guess that's it.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much.